Welcome to Another Education is Possible, a podcast about education's radical potential. I'm your host, Jordan Corson. Everyone loves study groups. Ruth Wilson Gilmore praised them. The education scholar Lee Patel dedicated an entire book to them. Friend of the podcast, Eli Meyerhoff's book, Beyond Education, similarly explores the revolutionary potential of study. It seems like every radical bookstore I've ever been to has about 5 of them going at any given time. But as today's guests, members of JAWS, which stands for Jews Against White Supremacy, as they remind us, study is not neutral or simply some kind of intellectual curiosity. Radical study and political struggle are always deeply entangled in complementary aspects of revolutionary projects. In today's episode, JAWS members explore the role of political education within their organization and the role of study and struggle for Jewish folks in the Palestine Solidarity movement more broadly. So let's jump in with members of JAWS. Members of JAWS, welcome to Another Education is Possible. How's everybody doing?
Doing great. Very happy to be here.
It's wonderful to have you all. We're going to keep it to first names for this episode.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a member of the JAWS Executive Committee, and I mainly handle day-to-day tasks and operations.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I am a member of JAWS.
Hi, I'm Oz. I'm a member of the JAWS Executive Committee, and I handle political education mainly.
Just out of transparency, I think I'll say that I am an active member of JAWS. We'll just leave it there for now. Let's start where we start with every guest. What did Judaism, Zionism, and Palestine look like for you all growing up?
I'm patrilineal Jewish, which, we don't have to enter the discourse on that, but my dad's side is Jewish. My mom's side is part European, part Lebanese. It was generally a very secular upbringing. Honestly, not a lot of the, discussions of Zionism were not at all there, at all. I mean, my dad, who's the Jewish side, very, very militantly atheist, so, grew up sort of conservative, maybe a little Orthodox Jewish, sort of in that gray area, I guess, is the way he would describe it. And so he rebelled against that. I mean, there are pictures of him wearing a keffiyeh in college or something, which is kind of cool, but that was never, I was never told about any of that or what Palestine was. It was a while before I knew anything about Palestine outside of the fact that my grandpa really wanted to go to so-called Israel, and then my dad would never ever do that, and that was the extent. But I didn't know any of the political reasons. I thought, as a kid, that it was just because my dad hated, the religious aspects of his upbringing. I don't know. They're both very liberal. It was sort of that thing of it's the Middle East, it's very mystical, very complicated, and heavy air quotes. So yeah, but it was really I was introduced to a lot of it, but it was really when Al-Aqsa flood started that I, first of all, started to know things about Palestine, but also started to try to understand what being Jewish meant for me, because there wasn't really any reason for me to look into that up until then. It was just very in the background. So yeah, and I think something that I discovered was, how much, especially, I'm Ashkenazi, how much Ashkenazi Jews struggled for liberation in Europe, both, against fascism, against Tsarism, which is why my family left. And that made me have an actual, where people did actually struggle for something just. But then now with Palestine, right, like what it means to be Jewish and struggling for quote unquote freedom is like ultimately tied to genocide. And so then I also started to like look into my Lebanese side. Like my grandma is very, very Arab, which I didn't realize until like actually started talking with her about it, but it's very funny. Although interestingly, the week after Al-Aqsa flood, I was talking to my grandpa and he said that my Jewish grandpa, and he said that I could be on quote unquote either side because I'm Jewish and Arab. And so that was like, and then my Arab grandma was like, every time I would see her, she'd be like, "Are you Jewish?" And then I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, then how are you pro-Palestine?" I was like, "Oh my God." Like it was really Al-Aqsa flood that opened I guess this is funny word choice, but really opened the gates of like what it meant to be Jewish and part Arab and like both politically and culturally, I guess. And then which of course brought me to Jaws in trying to reorient Jewishness and the Jewish community, which is very ragtag. It's not like very well defined, right? Which is the way I like it. But in order to redefine and realign people with a more just struggle and to ultimately abandon Europe in a larger way.
I don't think I've really heard of someone growing up with Jewishness in their life and becoming Jewish while becoming anti-Zionist, while not having had direct involvement in the Palestine solidarity movement. I'd be interested, is that at all similar or different for you, Hannah or Sam?
Extremely different.
Say more.
So my parents, my mother is Jewish and my dad is a WASP, more or less. There's more to it, but his family doesn't speak to me. I don't know them. They don't fuck with Jews in any capacity. So I was raised only Jewish, but with this knowledge that like there is such a thing as other kinds of people and they feel very strongly about us. But I grew up at Beth Elohim, which is a large Reform synagogue in Brooklyn. And probably anyone who listens to this podcast is like 1 degree of separation from Beth Elohim. Chuck Schumer goes there. All of the very liberal Jews in New York go to Beth Elohim. And I was 3rd generation at the synagogue. Both my grandparents at different times had been presidents. My mom was the first bat mitzvah at the synagogue. I'm part of a dynasty. And my immediate family was significantly less wealthy than everyone else. It's in Park Slope, Brooklyn, which, if anyone doesn't know, is code for wealthy. And I was less than that amount of wealthy, is how I'll put it. And there was ambient Zionism. I would not say that I was, I didn't get the kinds of messaging of like, we love the IDF and we love soldiers and let's go to Mount Masada. But it was more matter of fact. It was like celebrating 70 years of Israel. It was like having Israeli speakers. It was half of the Hebrew school teachers were from Israel. There was no like critical discussion of that, at least, when I was 14. Who knows what was happening when they got older, but every single student went to Israel. I wasn't able to go to Israel because my mom couldn't afford it. And I thought that was fine, but it was interesting that I ended up dropping out of Hebrew school, which was a bummer because I should have been born into like a yeshiva family. The amount I really like engaging with religion and like observing Jewish traditions, and even like I've picked up and put down different halachic observances as an adult. I really like being Jewish and it's meaningful to me and guides my life in a lot of ways. But when I was in Hebrew school, by the time I was 14, if you weren't going on the Israel trip, there was nothing for them to teach you. They were at that point only teaching you about Israel, not even history, not even necessarily like lived culture. The memory that sticks really clearly in my mind actually is being shown photos of Tel Aviv, where my teacher, who is from, I don't remember where in Israel, was saying like, oh, look at the beautiful beaches, the beautiful buildings, the beautiful food. And me, shithead teenager, said, yeah, and all the beautiful people. And there's like, 10 women in bikinis looking like really, really sexy. And I remember all my classmates being like, ew, you're being like a 12-year-old pig. True. And then the teacher was like, no, but it's true. Like the people in Israel are really beautiful. And at the time I was just like, see, everyone's making fun of me, I'm right. But I look back on that memory as like, they were trying to make a 12-year-old have like sexual feelings about the state of Israel. And that was part of our Hebrew school curriculum at my very liberal synagogue. So
Yep.
that's sort of what I mean when I say there's a lot of ambient Zionism.
They literally call it bikini diplomacy. There's like a coin term.
Exactly. But like it took me till adulthood to really grasp like that was part of the propaganda. And around the same time, when I'm like 12 and up till I was like 15, maybe, I was becoming more and more like anti-theist, not just atheist, but like Richard Dawkins type. And I was like, religion is stupid. I hate this. And to be fair, that was the religion that I was being taught. So it was stupid and I do hate it. At the same time, I was really active on Tumblr. I learned to be anti-Israel, but I never could have articulated it as anti-Zionist. I don't think I could have really explained what Zionism was, but I was getting a very like comparable to Twitter discourse almost, like a really rudimentary and in many ways flawed understanding of just like Israel bad that then I went back on and I was like more Zionist and then I was less Zionist. But by the time I was 16, I knew that I was never going to go on birthright, like until things were different, whatever that exactly meant to me at that time. There was definitely no discussion of Palestine or Palestinians. The only time I can remember talking about Palestinians is my mom had a boyfriend who was conservative Jewish. We were Reform Jewish. And I was saying something to him like, we should give back Israel. We should give it back to Palestinian people. And he said to me, well, what's next? Like, well, you think we should give back America to Native Americans? And I was like, I would never have even thought of that. You're a fucking genius. Like, yeah. And so that I also think of as like a moment of political awakening for me. But it wasn't until years later that I was really describing myself as anti-Zionist and understanding myself.
I think we're hitting up to the point where I think Oz, you shared how the Alexa flood was a bit of an awakening. So Sam, what came next?
I was becoming less and less affiliated with being Jewish. I had grown up really steeped in it. Like, as I said, I'm dynastic at this synagogue. And we, like my family, had these gigantic Rosh Hashanah parties that like every Jew in Brooklyn came to the party practically. And we were very Reform observant. And then I was dissociating from that as I got older and had issues with the community I grew up in because of class. It was like really clear that I was not welcome. Because of politics, there was just this sort of ickiness of the liberal politics that I at that time couldn't identify, but was obviously not coherent. And I became someone who was like, I'm not Jewish. I have like Jewish ancestry. Mind you, my name is Finkelstein. So that doesn't really land that well. But in college, I encountered anti-Semitism for what I really consider basically the first time in my life. And some of it was mixed up in anti-Zionism and some of it was just, you don't like Jews. And that kind of pushed me to become more interested in being Jewish. And as I was developing more of an understanding of my own culture and my own religious beliefs, I was obviously forced to also grapple with Zionism. And any version of Judaism that was interesting to me was anti-Zionist. And those things developed in tandem for me. So I guess in that way, I'm similar to Oz. Like me becoming Jewish and me becoming anti-Zionist were very entwined. And specifically, I read this book, The Colors of Jews, Radical Diasporism by Melanie K. Kantrowitz, one of the founders of the Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. And it like totally changed my life. It made me so interested in being Jewish. I learned that there were like all these Jewishes that I had never heard of. I didn't know there was a Bund. I didn't know that there were Jewish socialists and anarchists. And that there were all different kinds of religious Jews. I had no idea about that. And once I did, it like cracked open my head. I was like, I don't have to be Jewish in the way of my like just super stifling, elitist, horrible synagogue that I grew up in. I can be Jewish in like whatever eclectic way that I feel like. And that obviously includes like a free Palestine. And I was developing that consciousness in 2021. I still would not have called myself anti-Zionist. I probably would have called myself a one-state Zionist. And to me, that would have meant like, yeah, I believe Jews like belong in Israel, or that we should have a homeland in Israel, but that having a homeland doesn't mean a state that isn't like at all, or an ethno state. I was like some sort of funky anarchist Zionist that I was learning about the Sheikh Jarrah evictions for the first times and home demolitions. And my friend and I went to a protest in New York, in Bay Ridge, which is a very Arab area. And I was like, I don't exactly understand the whole picture, but I know that it's wrong to kick people out of their houses. So we went to this protest, and obviously everyone there was anti-Zionist, and many of them were Arab, and they were chanting from the river to the sea. And I was saying every chant except that one. I was like, I'll say anything, but from the river to the sea, like the idea that there should be no Jews from the river to the sea, I just can't abide that. And I don't have a specific moment, but eventually I went to enough of those events that I got over that. And I was just like, well, yeah, fuck it. From the river to the sea, there shouldn't be apartheid. That's pretty easy. I don't need to like emotionally reckon with that every time I hear it. And then that sort of took down some mental blocks for me. That was 2021. And then I read Anarchism and other essays by Emma Goldman. And I was like, well, I don't think there should be any countries. Israel is certainly no exception, except to the extent that it's worse. And then I was an anti-Zionist. I'm still not sure if I'm an anarchist, but definitely anti-Zionist.
Maybe we could try to convince you by the end of the episode to go full Emma Goldman. For you, Oz, there's like this flashpoint of a moment where things were bubbling underneath. And Sam, for you, is, I don't know what the image would be, maybe like an accordion of like this back and forth of in and out, making anti-Zionist noises that interrupt the ambient noise of Zionism. So does that fit within kind of your experiences, Hannah? Is it something totally different?
I'm closer to Oz. Both my parents are Jewish, but I was raised very secularly, and I think my mom maybe like is secular for like generations back. They're very much like, I'm a Jew. And then I also grew up most of my childhood in a town where we were like one of very few Jewish families, and didn't really like go to synagogue. I had also like an anti-theist phase. I don't know that I faced like directly like anti-Semitism, but it was definitely present in this way of I knew I was different and like not in a cool way. But I think that kind of shaped my orientation in a positive way, because I mean, this is all like white Christian, like pretty wealthy kids that I grew up with. And I was like, okay, well, they're racist and they're Islamophobic and they're homophobic and just all the hateful things. And they also like don't like Jewish people. So I think in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm not one of them. I'm like in this other group. That's how I like started to visualize like my identity and where I wanted to sit. I'm not religious. I felt really uncomfortable around other Jewish people because I felt kind of an imposter. I still sometimes feel that way when I'm like, I don't know how to say this or Hebrew word or what that holiday is. And there's a lot of those. And then I guess simultaneously, my parents we didn't know anyone in occupied Palestine. Actually, I have like cousins that we are just not really close to who would like go there. My parents are very like proud Democrat. That's how I was for a while. I was a very like Lisa Simpson kind of just like angry girl who wanted to talk about whatever politically. I'm not going to college. And after that, I kept moving left toward politically, like learning about like communism and Marxism and even like the Black Panther Party. And I think I was probably pretty focused. Just my attention, my knowledge base was around the US and the history of maybe movements here. I don't know, like you get to that point, you're just like, I mean, you can't be a Zionist. And I remember reading the Angela Davis collection of it's called Freedom is a Constant Struggle. I mean, that was only, I don't know, 2019 or something like that. But I think I had already been like, okay, like basically anti-Zionist. But I remember reading that and that like really solidified something for me. And then I think kind of like both Sam and us, I was like wanting to understand myself as a Jewish person more like in tandem with all these other developments that I was sort of going through and reading about Jewish revolution, like Rosa Luxemburg and other. I just felt things are kind of like coming together.
But yeah, like the things bubbling under the surface were not directly Jewish at first. It was reading Angela Davis, who of course writes about Palestine, but it was encountering Marxist thinkers, and then almost as a secondary aspect, seeing these anti-Zionist Jews from history, whether you're Rosa Luxemburg, you're Emma Goldman.
Right. I think I didn't understand, and I still don't maybe understand what it means to be Jewish. For a while, I was like, I guess I'm not Jewish because I'm not religious. And then I think like maybe tapping into maybe less liberal ideas of like understanding the world, I think things made a little more sense where it was sort of like, well, this is what it means to be Jewish now is different because of Zionism.
I'll share a quick anecdote that I think I would imagine many of us have that same constant questioning of our Judaism. Not to give too much of the behind the scenes, but I was note-taking in one of our several Jaws meetings today. And the number of times that I have Googled Tisha B'Av, but like I'm trying to insert where the fuck does the apostrophe go? Where's the A? Is it after the Tish? Is it the Tish? So this constant feeling of like, but if I don't know how to spell that, am I a real Jew? And then
Don't fall into the trap.
Right, exactly.
Because that holiday in particular does not take place during the Hebrew school semester. So almost no American Jews know how to spell it.
It's all a Zionist trap. But for whatever reason, as you all arrived at a standpoint of anti-Zionism, and you did so specifically as Jews, and there is a world of Jewish organizing, Jewish charity, Jewish liberalism that you could have ended up at. And I think before we get into why did you end up at Jaws, maybe we could just, in the briefest of terms, frame what is Jaws? What's the story of Jaws?
Jaws is an organization that seeks to organize Jewish people towards the struggle for Palestinian liberation and global liberation from imperialism. So far, we have done that by forming contingents at protests, Jewish anti-Zionist contingents at more general public protests, study groups, which we're going to get into, I believe, and political education, teach-ins, and we're starting a campaign relating to mass off mayors, and we got some other stuff cooking. Anyone else want to tap in? That's my elevator pitch.
Yeah. We're a Jewish anti-Zionist organization that desires global decolonization and global liberation from imperialism, specifically in Palestine, of course, right now, because it is not free, but also including Turtle Island or the so-called United States. We stand in principled solidarity with the Palestinian resistance specifically and the resistance factions in that region.
And I'd add one incredibly important point. JAWS stands for Jews Against White Supremacy, in case that wasn't made clear. So broadly speaking, we are an anti-imperialist anti-Zionist organization. And that has brought folks from, I think I'd be pretty loose in saying throughout the world, but definitely throughout the United States and some other places as well.
Well, there's some story there, actually.
Do you care to say a bit more?
Yeah. I think Hannah could speak to this better than I can, but just jump in. When Jaws began, it was a pretty international organization. And there are artifacts of this. Like, I worked on a Jaws Haggadah with someone who lives in the Philippines, quite a significant number of people in these different places. And then my understanding is most of them just felt it would be a better use of their time and energy to form local anti-Zionist Jewish groups where they can do organizing that, frankly, is just logistically easier. But then on top of that has like more material understanding, I guess, like, you know, what's happening in your town. Plus, America is like Jewishly, Zionismly is just such a different like landscape than basically everywhere else in the world that I don't know we necessarily have much wisdom or like too many discussions that are mutually beneficial. Not that we couldn't, like, we can always learn from anyone, or we ought to, but some active organizing, co-organizing makes more sense than others.
Maybe there's a bit of complicity and responsibility if, yeah.
I think Instagram posts that were, it was right after October 7th, was just not backing down from support of the resistance and not wavering, and there was no concern for both parties. It was like, this is, you know, we support liberation by any means necessary, and I was drawn to that.
I read the 1 year anniversary of Alexa Flood's statement, and I was like, holy shit. I mean, I think, you know, going to protests, JV, you know, orgs like JVP, etc., they're very prominent, of course. But I would read their statements, and I was not well versed in decolonial theory or knew anything about the resistance to that level. But when the most prominent messaging is, we care about the lives of both Israeli and Palestinian civilians, there's just something that fell off from that, right? On one hand, you're getting starved and bombed, and the other hand, you're enabling that. And it felt, you know, very wrong. So I sort of didn't, without any organization for a long time, because it didn't feel like there was any actual Jewish voice that was being honest or being true to the fact that the goal is a liberated Palestine and what that means materially. Hearing a Jewish group actually uplift the resistance, being anti-colonial, made me want to join right away.
I want to avoid the being, we've talked a lot about trying to not just be the anti-JVP or something like that, but for you, it was similar to me. It was being a bit frustrated by groups who were reading Frantz Fanon and then doing this kind of wishy-washy response to the conditions on the ground.
Exactly, and happy 100-year birthday, Fanon, which is today.
Yeah, we're recording on Fanon's 100th birthday.
It's very easy to be caught up into what the capitalist media tells you about Palestinian resistance without actually hearing from them yourself, you know. And so that was very helpful as well. And then I also read Blood in My Eye by George Jackson, which is more of a focused on revolution in so-called US. He was a Black Panther in prison, for people who don't know, and he wrote this incredible book about what it would take to have revolution in the so-called US. I think ultimately what really caused me to join Jaws in the end was sort of being able to jump over the hurdle of settler fear, which is still something that, of course, I hold because it's very hard to shed. But in both trying to abandon that and then to organizing against that, it really allows you to actually stand for freedom and for justice.
Yeah, for me, I was not in any political organizations prior to Al-Aqsa flood. I found myself at a mourners Kaddish event on October 11th, 2023, that was supposed to be for Palestinians and Israelis, which I was really excited to attend. I think it was organized by If Not Now. I didn't have a strong sense of what that meant at the time.
And sorry to interrupt, but since we are a podcast, which is an audio medium, you've been putting large air quotes around
Sorry.
a lot of the things you're saying.
But thanks for pointing that out. What did I even air quote just now?
The whole thing.
Israelis and Palestinians.
Oh, yes, quote unquote, Israelis and Palestinians. And just the way that things were spoken at that event, there was a specific line. Brad Lander, comptroller of New York City, said something to the effect, the Israelis killed by Hamas and the Palestinians killed in Gaza. And it was just such a perfect side by side. Oh, you are not treating these things equally. And at that time, I wanted them treated equally. Now I'm like, further, I don't think they should be treated equally. But for that even to be the bar, I was like so disgusted. And I think back on that as a moment, like I wish I had screamed at the guy, but you heard everybody go like, oh. And so then I was like, well, I have to meet other Jews that feel how I feel. So I happened to see a JPREG sign at a protest like in November or something. And I didn't realize JPREG still existed because it seems Jewish, anti-racist, socialist group of lesbians sound like something that lived and died in the 90s, in my opinion, but it's still around. So I joined JPREG. I have a lot of positive stuff to say about JPREG. I learned a lot there. I also learned it's not an anti-Zionist organization. They formally are opposed to the quote occupation with no definition of the occupation. And I find that that's pretty common for liberal and left of liberal Jews, is to be opposed to occupation and the occupation, but like choose not to define that because it makes it difficult to maintain a large group of members. And I was like, okay, so this place is good, but it can't be my whole thing because I want to be around anti-Zionist Jews. And I want to be around Jews who anti-Zionism is part of what it means to be Jewish to them. And I think I found Jaws on an Instagram post. They were just like tagged somewhere. I was at I think the first Monday meeting ever at the People's Forum, not ever, but the first one like of this onslaught. And I saw a Jaws member give a presentation. Everyone in the Shut It Down coalition gave this is my group. If anyone wants to get involved, let me know. Someone from Jaws was there and I like hunted him down. I met a bunch of anti-Zionist Jews and now I'm here. And that was last March. So about a year and a half ago.
So Jaws does a lot of stuff. Jaws is not just an educational organization, but I'm interested where, for you all, education comes into the mix. Whether, I think one way of framing this is like, what are you learning? How are you? I would hope that you didn't fill out the Jaws member form, interest form, whatever we call it, and say, okay, I'm an anti-Zionist now. I support Palestine. I don't need to learn anything for the rest of my life. I'm good. So what do you continue to learn? How is your thinking shaped by engagement with Jaws? And what kind of things are you engaged in, be it political education, be it kind of these more public events that are happening at the People's Forum in New York, or more public pedagogy, like we've had teach-ins around the Jewish National Fund. Where does education come into the mix for you all?
I think that we want to build a cadre of Jews with a strong political consciousness to be as powerful as we can be. I think it's a part of pushing our work forward and like efficiently and powerfully. And I think researching like other organizations of present and past, it's political education and maybe always like a very important part of an organization. And especially, I mean, in the United States, I think we're very backwards people. I think there's a lot of like unlearning that we have to do, even if you are anti-Zionist and you support the resistance and like you have all these, you've come to these correct conclusions. I think there's still a lot of like how to think even properly is something that a lot of us haven't done. I think need to practice doing how to think critically rather than based on like principles or based on your feelings, that sort of thing. So I think it's like how to think and how to learn.
Yeah, I think ultimately, what does it in the US, in any settler colony, the oppressed are, this is just Du Bois, but the oppressed are taught to see themselves through the eyes of their oppressors. And the settlers are the foot soldiers, right? In daily life, both literally in military context and just in general. So, as Jews, most Jews in the world at this point are settlers in one way or another. And so, what are we trying to attack at? We are trying to attack the, first of all, we're trying to, you know, kill the settler in the minds of Jews, right? And what comes along with that, which is egoism, which is, I mean, yeah, egoism is the main one. I'll just say that. And I think the way that political education comes to that, because of course the experience is like, I don't know, it's very arguable which one is more important, right? But like, there's always an event that shifts someone's political consciousness. For this generation, it was the Al-Aqsa flood. This generation being probably like Gen Z, just to put in context with like the student encampments. And there is a whole group of people, whether they're Jews or not, who are ready, who are hoping for revolution, actual revolution in the place that we live in. So where political education comes in for Jaws, and I mean in general, is like interpreting world events, right? And like Hannah said, learning how to think. Our ways of processing the world are fundamentally different because we grew up where we did, because we're of the media apparatus that surrounds us at all times. And so combating that with, you know, critical pedagogy, just be very topical. The best things about learning from global South revolutionaries is they're all very honest. I think something that's very clear when someone's liberal and when someone's not. It's sometimes you can tell when someone is saying is leaving something out, right? I think where political education comes in from Jaws is being able to create community where members know each other, right? Where we can also works very well as a security apparatus. There's nothing that allows us to understand our members more than constantly reaffirming our politics and how they react to that. Because it's very hard to fake, truly. And it also serves as expanding the political imagination of people. Like all these left of center, social democratic DSA candidates who are still Zionists, right? But they're as left wing as anyone's seen. And when anyone suggests organizing around the people's needs, or I don't know can I say armed struggles? I can only get the thing censored. I mean, probably
I think many guests have said armed struggle.
armed struggle, armed propaganda, like things like that, or those like real, like it's crazy that the US, it's so rare because in most political struggles in the entire world, that's like very popular form, right? And so I think it opens the minds of the masses, and it allows other world events that also do that. It allows us to interpret them. It allows us to give that to the people, because it's very easy to skew a revolutionary act into a act of hysteria or terror, or in heavier quotes of terrorism, right? So when we reaffirm our politics, also from the standpoints of the fact that we benefit from we're Jews in this equation, right? And this is very much framed as a Jews versus Arabs thing. And so when we as Jews say that we side with the colonized people of the world in a very principled manner, that serves as a very important political education that tells people that that is allowed, that that is warranted, and that is ultimately needed for Jews to be able to actually organize for something that is helping the world instead of poisoning it. Something I'm very passionate about is like expanding beyond the canon of the five dudes that everyone reads into Pan-African struggle, into indigenous struggle. People's view of leftist political organizing in America is literally DSA. And so when we show them George Jackson, when we connect people to the direct political history of revolutionaries in the places that we've actually know, that is also so powerful.
I'm hearing a couple of things in there, which is one, I was going to ask you all kind of grounding this in specific examples, and you're sharing, Blood in My Eye, Soledad Brothers, like texts that you've encountered that have expanded your understanding and helped you rethink and reevaluate. But two, the thing that I think all of you have hit on throughout our conversation, which is education happens not through like, I'm going to teach you a thing, you're going to learn it, there will be an outcome, but seeing something that the way I always frame it is that education happens when we encounter something that's slightly beyond ourselves, right? I think one example that comes to mind, Sam, is you saying you read Emma Goldman and just being like, oh, fuck, Jews can be like this? Like, this can be Judaism? Shit, like that. So as I was just saying, like expanding our political imagination happens, but not just by seeing what people write and imagining things, but seeing what has actually happened. But I'm kind of cutting it in the middle here because I think there's more to share, like what all you have encountered educationally through Jaws. And Sam, I don't think we'd heard from you yet.
What have I encountered? I'll tell you. I like to often describe myself as an illiterate communist, as I like clearly get the vibe, America is wrong, but I have not read very much theory beyond Emma Goldman, one book. But in becoming a member of leadership in Jaws, which happened mostly out of necessity more than because I am a genius or anything, I started having to read these texts like what Oz was describing. We read a text, I don't remember what it was called, by Grace Lee Boggs, who was an organizer.
Organization means commitment.
There we go. That one. That was like super eye-opening as to just like why we do things the way that we do, making me buy into it more. And like, as you said, just learning from the mistakes or the struggles that others have had in the past, that we don't have to repeat them ourselves and like build everything from scratch. Reading about the Communist Party of the Philippines and their strategy for meeting people where they are while simultaneously like kind of culling the people that are not going to cut it to be inner circle, but still maintaining contacts and like entering as many new spaces as they can, but doing so strategically. And it just, these people are smart and they did stuff. And, if we can take a tenth of that to our work, that would be incredible.
I'm thinking of the Bill Haywood quote of like, I've never read Marx's Capital, but I bear the marks of capital. Also, again, I think that gets back to the basic idea of like, this is an ongoing process. And I think it's also one that's unqualified. You don't have to take I'm not going to make this an ad for Jaws, but like, you don't have to take a test to get into Jaws. There's no like, hey, you want to fight for Palestinian liberation? Well, here's a quick quiz to make sure you're good enough to go, right? Like, it's about your commitment and your values, which is, I guess that is a qualification, but it's not a knowledge-based form of intellectualism.
Ideally, and we're working to make this more of the case, when you enter Jaws, you study your ass off and work your ass off.
Yeah.
So that we can be effective. I think generally this is something that is really unknown about political organizations, especially within a lot of the like more like what we see as now as organizing on the US left, of like huge rallies it's a lot of boring ass shit. Like, it's a lot of doing work, and it's not glorious at all. But, especially as people who are not leading the revolution and who will never lead the revolution, right? Like, that's not a role. I mean, as Jews, right? In Turtle Island. And so I mean, that's like also the brunt of political education is like you are studying, you are trying to absorb knowledge quickly and then cement that knowledge through action. Not to use a buzzword, it's a very dialectical relationship between study and political work. You can read On Practice on Contradiction by Mao a million fucking times, and you won't know how it works until you organize. And that is why political education within organizations is more valuable than picking up Marx's Capital and reading it on your own. Because ultimately, what socialism and anti-colonialism and all these things about, their philosophy, it's philosophy, but it's the philosophy of making change. It's not supposed to be read in isolation. It's not supposed to be read in action. That's what I think makes decolonial and socialist theories make people feel so powerful. It's because it's very like how you can actually apply it. And I think that's what separates it and what makes it so important.
Yeah. That it doesn't stop at the study. You have to have the struggle, right? It has to be those two entwined, which is why people say study and struggle and study together. But I actually want to close with kind of a curveball that I didn't put in the questions. I've been struggling with this idea that literally my job is education in multiple ways. Both I'm a professor who works with future public school teachers, and I work as a teacher at a university. And I'm starting to think that education actually doesn't play much of a role, and that the study part isn't as important as the struggle part, if it plays any role at all. Like there's learning, but learning is a very small fraction of education. And the learning part is tactical. It's how do we get here? What materials do we bring? When do we show up? I mean, particularly for US, I don't want to undermine political education. And I'm also saying this as somebody who has dedicated his life. I have taught elementary school, high school, university. I want to fight for public schools and public education while also being deeply involved in a number of political educational activities throughout Philadelphia and New York. And so what do you think, Hannah? Help me find faith in the study part of study and struggle.
I feel complicated because I think when you're doing this as a job through like a U.S. institution, it's going to be different from the left organization. But I think there's just like a lot of like longer term work that needs to be done to like keep being able to do those things and keep being able to do even more impactful things. And I think that does involve education. I mean, I think there's still like a lot of people who like don't even realize how miserable their own lives are. And like, I think they need to be shown that. I can't remember what made me think of this, but I guess that like, I think because of us being a Palestine solidarity organization, it's important for us to like look to Palestinian liberation movement, and education clearly has been a very significant part of what they do, from like, the FLP and from the prisoners movement. Tangentially, there was a course that some of us in New York went to that Palestinian Youth Movement gave, when one of the lessons was like actually just about political education, the importance of that, and like the narrative struggle. Someone said something about just that Zionism doesn't liberate Jews from anti-Semitism. I feel like that is something I learned in a class that like kind of helped me to frame like what we are doing here. And we're not centering ourselves, but like this is like we have to see where we have to think about what is our position. I don't think that's a necessary part of like being an organization. And I think if we see ourselves as being, we are implicated in this, I think also we are fighting for liberation from anti-Semitism by also fighting for Palestinian liberation.
I think education, I mean, I was sort of what Hannah said. I mean, I don't know the specifics of what you're doing, but I think ultimately it's important to remember that like the Western Academy is another arm of its overall oppressor structure. That's like a not very highbrow word for it. But I think ultimately, like going back to what Hannah said about what people do, how people struggle in Palestine, Leila Khaled did an autobiography, and she was 15 when she joined the PFLP. And she was desperate to pick up a rifle and shoot Zionists, understandably. I mean, like, literally vibes. And they had her organize a study group. She, like, please, I don't want to fucking talk about theory. You know what I mean? But she was barely a member, right? Before she had organized a local study chapter. And I mean, the context is different, of course, because we're not colonized people. But I think ultimately we have no grounds in which to create a movement that, I mean, not only will fight for Palestine, but also stand up for everyone, you know, without without politics. There has to be a way to get a heightened political consciousness that will be able to be moved by that action, right? Al-Aqsa flood was in a very good time for some reason. Like, I don't know if people just saw it and were so moved by it, and it didn't even require that, but that was an action that ignited the political flames of the world. There has to be there has to be a way able to build up to revolution, build up to action, be able to recover from any repression. And you can't do that with people who literally don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And I think Walter Rodney was referred to as a guerrilla scholar, in the sense that he was a brilliant economist, whatever, but he was also an intense fucking organizer. And he got assassinated for it. And so, I don't know. I think struggle is just incomplete without any study. But I do understand your frustration because people will say that and then they don't do any fucking struggle. That's a very real problem. I don't know. I guess we just have to keep working at it to be able to integrate struggle, to be able to have people work alongside with the reading and with the discussing. I do agree that like reading is useless without struggle, but that it's sort of connected inexorably.
There's a coincidence there that said this is actually part of a paper that I'm working on that takes up the Leila Khaled biography as the counterexample, saying kind of where I am in my thinking is that education is only important if you give up whiteness, that there's no education, which also relates to, I think, a great James Baldwin piece about how Jews are racist because they embraced whiteness and they needed to flee from it. But that's a divergence from all of this. I don't know. I constantly struggle, but you know, what do you think?
Well, I've got a response for you as well.
Please.
One thing that I have learned that has been very almost comforting to me is this idea that we will not be the ones that are bringing about the revolution. And when I say that, I mean, JAWS is a Palestine solidarity organization, or we are, part of the global Palestine liberation movement. We are also hope to become a decolonial force here, wherever we find ourselves. But we are not going to be the horse, and it's entirely likely that we won't even be alive when Turtle Island, America, whatever individual republics come next. We're not going to be here for that. And our job is not to liberate this place as soon as we can. Our job is to just create the next thing, the next crop of people, the next situations that will create the next crop and the next crop and the next crop. And in, 4 generations, they are going to liberate this land and all of the people that live on it. And for that, I think education is really necessary. I think, for us to take actions that are strategic, that are even like successful, I actually don't think we need that much education for us to do things that are worthwhile today. But I think in order to create a world that creates even more people and more radical people and more active people, we need to think and know a lot and really differently. I really came to believe this because I was a middle school teacher for a brief period, and I tried to be an anarchist teacher. And I tried to never threaten them or, impose requirements. If you do this or don't do this, I'm going to tell your parents. I didn't want to coerce a child, even into math problems. And what I learned is that these were not anarchist children. They were children that knew how to respond to coercion and knew that if there was an absence of coercion, that was their opportunity to, goof off or do whatever they wanted to do. And it was just clear, even the stuff that they did well, the stuff they did poorly, all of it was wrapped up in the political social context that they were created in. And that I could not be an anarchist teacher to these non-anarchist children. And our job as Jaws, not necessarily to create anarchist children, but to create, the circumstances that allow there to be more radical people. And, that really, I think, connects to the name of this podcast. Another world is possible. Another education is possible. There's a line from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers. You don't have to complete the work, but you're also not free to desist from it. I have that framed hanging on the wall of my bedroom because I think it's like the best thing ever. We will not free the world, but we can do something that just makes it easier for the next person to do something. And I think that requires education.
Today's episode was produced by Yardain Amran, Samantha Haley, and me. If you like our podcast, you can find us on Instagram. Please also like, rate, follow, subscribe, all those things. JAWS members and the JAWS organization in general supports the Samir Project. We'll be sharing many links to the Samir Project and ways to support them on our Instagram. You can find us there at Another Ed is Possible. Thanks as always for listening. We'll be back soon with a new episode of Another Education is Possible.